Mrs. Bongos is a great friend of mine, and I have whispers inside the palace have finally turned into a storm. King Charles has made the shocking move to walk away from Queen Camilla. The turning point came when Prince William uncovered a betrayal so deep it shook the royal family to its core. Those closest to the throne say the king was left with no choice after hearing the truth. This is and one insider claimed the crown may remain steady on Charles's head, but his heart is broken in silence. What did William reveal that destroyed it all? Join us to explore the details. The dossier of betrayal. The morning sun rose gently over Buckingham Palace, painting its walls with soft golden light, the sparrows in the royal guard, and saying as if nothing in the world was amiss. But inside, behind the thick stone walls and ancient Gothic windows, a silence heavier than any crown rested upon. King Charles III, he sat alone, and his private study, his frail hands trembling as they hovered over a thick dossier that had been delivered to him in the dead of night. His eyes were weary, but there was no escaping what those pages revealed. Each sheet carried words sharper than steel, and at the bottom of every document was a forged signature that chilled his soul. Camilla is written with a clumsy but deliberate hand. This cannot be, Charles whispered to himself, his voice barely more than a breath. Yet the proof lay before him, cold and undeniable. The papers told a story of betrayal more cutting than any scandal he had endured before. Priceless jewels that once adorned his mother, Queen Elizabeth II, the very pearl she had worn at her coronation, the ruby necklace that had gleamed underground chandelier years, had been praised in secret, then sold and hidden auctions across faraway markets. Each treasure that had once carried history and pride was now lost to strangers who would never understand their meaning. Charles turned another page, his chest tightening as if the air itself had been stolen from the room. Balmoral, with its windswept fields and solemn hills, states that held the memory of countless summers with his family, had been quietly transferred into the hands of faceless companies. Even Windsor Castle's antique vases, paintings, and carved chairs, each piece whispering stories of centuries gone, had slipped away through contract, so shadowed no light could reach them. His breath grew ragged. He pressed his palm to as hard as though to steady Camilla. He muttered, voice breaking like fragile glass. He rose from his chair, gripping the damning dossier until his knuckles turned white. He stepped toward the tall window and gazed out over the gardens. Reed roses, Camilla favorite, bloomed brilliantly in the morning sun, yet today their beauty seemed false, almost mocking. You've crossed a line, he whispered, his words trembling as though spoken to the roses themselves. You've betrayed me, betrayed my mother and the crown. For decades Charles had learned to endure. He had weathered storms of criticism, scandal, and whispers that sought to shatter him. He had trained himself to remain calm when the world mocked, to hold his head high when his own heart faltered. But this was different. This was not the world against him. This was the woman he had trusted above all, the woman for whom he had sacrificed his image, his honor, and his peace with his own fan. Emily. The betrayal tore through him like a silent storm. This wasn't about jewels or estates. It was about memory, about legacy, about the promise he had made to his late mother to safeguard the monarchy. She had given her life to protect. Every object stolen carried more than value. It carried history. The necklace, the land, the vases. Each was a fragment of a promise, now shattered. He closed his eyes, and in that silence the ghost of Diana flickered in his heart. Her laughter, her sorrow or love, it all came rushing back. Had he been blind all along? Had his need for companionship made him ignore truths that had been there, hidden beneath smiles and roses? Charles's voice cracked as he spoke to the empty room. Was it love at all, Camilla, or was I nothing but a step on your path to power? His body trembled, his fingers digging into the edges of the dossier until deep red lines formed in his palms. Painful questions whirled Without mercy. Why had she done this? Was the marriage nothing more than a stage for her ambitions? At the years of loyalty, sacrifice and patience been for nothing, the room seemed smaller now, its air suffocating. He turned from the window, his face pale, but his jaw clenched with a strength born from heartbreak. The dossier lay heavy in his hand, yet heavier still was the truth. It carried a king's crown, might have been forged from gold and jewels, but at that moment it felt like a chain of iron. Charles lowered himself back into his chair, the silence pressing in once more, his eyes fixed on the roses beyond the window, their petals glowing red as if stained with secrets. He spoke again, his voice steady this time though his heart quaked inside him. You've not only betrayed me, Camilla, you've betrayed the monarchy, the very soul of this nation, and for that there is no forgiveness. And on the other side of the world was Camilla. What was going through her own mind at this point? Stay with us. The Queen's mirror and the King's truth. The palace that morning glittered with its usual grace, yet beneath the polished marble and gold lay storms unseen. In the royal bedchamber, far from the silence of Charles' study, Camilla stood before a gilded mirror. She adjusted a silk scarf around her neck, her hands steady, eyes gleaming with quiet pride. Even in her 70s, she carried herself with the elegance of a woman who knew how to command attention. Her silver hair was perfectly arranged, her smile rehearsed to face the world with confidence. She had no idea, no knowledge of the dossier resting in Charles' trembling hands, no thought that her carefully built web was moments away from unraveling to her. Everything still looked smooth like pieces on a chessboard. She believed she controlled every signature forged, every asset transferred, every secret deal made. She trusted it all had been executed with precision, trusted that those who had helped her would never betray her. Camilla, reflection in the mirror, stared back, strong and sure. This is for the monarchy, she told herself, though her voice wavered inside, for its survival, for stability and uncertain times. Yet deep in her heart, she knew there was another truth. It wasn't just about duty, it was about power. Years of criticism had scarred her, the endless comparisons to Diana, the whispers that she did not belong, the eyes that measured her as less than a true queen. All of it burned quietly inside her. Camilla wanted more than survival. She wanted recognition. She wanted to prove she was not merely the shadow beside Charles, but the woman who could shape the monarchy's future. She moved away from the mirror and sank into an armchair, her foot angers absently brushing the wedding ring she wore. Her gaze shifted toward the gardeners where red roses bloomed, her favorite flowers. A smile curved across her lips. Charles won't understand, she thought, her voice in her mind confident. Then the smile deepened. But he doesn't need to. When all is complete, he will see I was right. He will thank me. She believed she was safe. She believed her plan was flawless. She believed her secret was still hers. But just a few corridors away, Charles stood with the weight of betrayal heavy and his grip. The dossier lay thick on his desk, its edges sharp, its pages filled with truths that sliced deeper than any blade. He lowered himself into his chair, his hands shaking, his breath unsteady. His eyes rose to the portrait of his mother, Queen Elizabeth II, stared back at him from the frame, her gaze from her expression calm, as if even in death she was watching, waiting for him to uphold the vow he had made. The husbands doubt. The corridors of Buckingham Palace stretched long and heavy that morning, their silence pressing down like stone for King Charles III. Each step he took within those walls seemed endless, as though the palace itself had grown larger with the weight of his sorrow. His mind was no longer steady. It was a storm of questions and shadows. In his study, he sat before the oak desk, the dossier of betrayal still near at hand. Yet today, it was not the forged signatures that shook him most. It was something far deeper, something that pierced not the crown, but the heart of a husband. His phone buzzed relentlessly. each vibration like a cruel reminder of the world outside. Advice. Users are sent urgent messages, aides forwarded headlines, and at the center of it all was a rumor that made his chest tighten with pain. Camilla, his queen, his companion of more than 3 decades, had been seen meeting with Anthony Aldridge. Charles picked up the phone, his fingers trembling. The screen glowed with blurry photographs from a London cafe in them. Camilla sat, wrapped in her familiar beige coat, across from a man with salt and pepper hair, smiling politely. As he leaned toward her, Charles recognized him instantly. Aldridge, the man who had once been part of Camilla, passed long before she became his wife, his queen, his greatest controversy, and his fiercest love. Though the images were unclear, the suggestion was sharp. The tabloids had already spread them like wildfire. Underneath the photos, cruel words cut deep. "The Queen is at it again," another sneered. Charles should have stayed with Diana. His breath caught. He placed the phone down, then shoved it away with a sudden force. The clatter echoed through the study like a final note of judgment. "Not this," he whispered, pressing a hand to his chest, as if trying to hold himself together. "Not her, not again." The betrayal of the dossier had already stripped him of certainty. Now this rumor struck at his most fragile place. Trust he had built over years of sacrifice. He had. Camilla understood him like no one else could. He had believed their bond was forged not only in love, but in survival after decades of scandal, criticism, and loneliness. Yet now, sitting in that study with the palace walls closing in, he wondered if the love he had defended so fiercely had been nothing more than a mirage. He pushed himself from the desk and walked to the balcony, throwing open the doors. The morning air rushed against his face, cool and sharp, yet it did nothing to calm the chaos inside of the royal garden, stretched below, serene and unchanged. But for Charles, they no longer held color. He gripped the railing, his eyes fixed on the roses that Camilla had once tended with her own hands. Once those flowers had been their secret language, blooming as symbols of affection when the world seemed set against them. But now the red petals seemed fragile, reminding him that even the strongest trust could be cut down with a single stroke. "Where did I go wrong?" he whispered into the wind. His voice broke, carried away by the breeze, swallowed by the vast gardens below. Memories flooded him, those early days when he and Camilla met in quiet corners, hidden from the public eye, when she was his solace in life torn between duty and a marriage that was crumbling. Her laughter, her warmth, her presence had been the only place where he felt truly seen. He had fought for that love. He had endured the scorn of the press, the disapproval of family, and the ache of public judgment. He had lost Diana, and yet he had clung to Camilla with the belief that theirs was a love worth every battle. But now he asked himself whether it had all been an illusion. Did she love him for the man he was, or was it the power that crowned the throne? And the history that surrounded him, the questions, tormented him, refusing to release their grip. He turned back inside his body, heavy, his step steady. At the desk, he lowered himself into the chair and took a sheet of paper. His hands shook as he held the pen, but forced himself to write. The words were brief, but each letter carried the weight of "is wounded hard." "To meet me at Clarence House this afternoon." He folded the load and gave it to an aide with instructions to deliver it at once. The study was silent again. The only sound was his own uneven breathing. Charles leaned back, staring at the ceiling as though searching for answers in its ornate carvings. For a moment he closed his eyes, feeling the weight of both crown and heart pressing upon him. Finally, he mustered courage. So what did he say to Camilla? And how did this attribute to him leaving her? Let's dive into it. The courage to confront Clarence House seemed to hold its breath, as if the very walls sensed the storm that was about to break. Once a sanctuary of warmth, where Charles and Camilla had shared private laughter and fireside evenings, the drawing room now felt colder than stone. The air was heavy, the kind of silence that pressures against the skin. Thick, your curtains muffled the the light allowing only faint streaks to fall across the polished, wooden floor. Charles stood near the tea table, his posture heavy with weariness. Before him lay the dossier, its presence undeniable, its pages filled with proof of betrayal. Dressed in a plain grey suit, his shoulders sloped with the burden he carried, his eyes, dark with sorrow, revealed the torment within. The door opened softly, and Camilla entered. She carried herself with the same confidence that it always shielded her, though a flicker of unease passed through her eyes. When they landed on the dossier, she wore a pale blue dress and a silk scarf tied carefully at her neck like armor for a battle she had not expected. She offered a faint smile, the kind she had used countless times to smooth tension. Charles, she said lightly, what's this about? Another busy day of paperwork? I presume. Her voice was gentle, but Charles heard the strain beneath it. He did not return her smile. Instead, he pushed the dossier toward her, the motion sharp, his gaze fixed. Camilla, he said, his voice trembling, but steady enough to cut through the silence. You've signed things that do not belong to you. This is my mother's legacy. This is the nation's legacy. Camilla smile faltered. She lowered herself into a chair and flipped through a few pages with feigned calm. Charles, what are you talking about? These are just administrative matter. You've been unwell. I was only trying to help. The word broke from him, almost as a shout echoing across the chamber. He stepped closer, his fists clenched at his sides. Is restraint slipping? You call forging my name, selling my mother's jewels, and handing over royal lands? Help? No, Camilla, you didn't do this for me. You did this for yourself. She stepped back, the color draining from her face, but quickly gathered herself. Charles, you're misunderstanding. I was trying to secure a future. The monarchy needs resources. Times are changing. You know this better than anyone. I did what had to be done. She reached out her hand, brushing his sleeve, but he pulled away, his eyes burning away. Hurt, secure? Charles repeated, his voice low, heavy as lead. You've trampled on my mother's memory, on Diana's memory, on everything this monarchy was built upon. And as if that weren't enough, those meetings with Aldridge, did you think I wouldn't know? The name struck her like a whip. Her lips parted, but no defense came. The blurry photo she had dismissed now returned to haunt her. Charles, she stammered, you're blowing this out of proportion. Anthony is just an old friend and advisor, nothing more. You know, I love you. Love me? Charles let out a bitter laugh, sharp and wrong. He turned away, his steps dragging him to the fireplace where a framed photo of their wedding day stood. He lifted it gently, his fingers tracing the smiling faces frozen in time. His voice trembled, bitter and aching. I gave up everything for you, my honor, my family's trust, the people's faith. I stood by you in the world's bad at our feet, and now I don't even know what I've been protecting. Camilla, his composure cracked. A chill spread through her as she saw him no longer as the husband who always defended her, but as a man stripped of patience. She stepped forward, her voice soft, pleading. Charles, listen to me. I should have told you, yes, but I never meant to betray you. I wanted to make us stronger, so no one could ever look down on us again. That was all I wanted. She reached for his shoulder, but he stood on, moving his back, turned a statue of grief and silence. The room was thick with words, and said with love bruised beyond repair. Her voice broke again. Charles, we've endured so much. Don't let this destroy everything we've built. But her words were laid against the fortress of is hard enough coming. His tone was calm now, but colder than the winter winds that swept across Balmoral. He turned his eyes, stripped of warmth. I need time to think. But hear me clearly, what you've done is not just a betrayal of me. It is a betrayal of the monarchy itself. The Queen's silent battle. The echo of Charles's footsteps still lingered in the halls of Clarence House long after he left the drawing room. Camilla stood frozen, her eyes fixed on the door. He had closed behind him, the silence pressed down on her chest like a weight. She could not live that room, once their safe place, now felt hollow, stripped of warmth, stripped of love. So Slowly she reached out her hand, brushing the fabric of the armchair where Charles had once sat, speaking to her of his dreams for the monarchy, have a future they would build together for the first time. Fear grifter, not fear of the public, not fear of the press, not even fear of losing the crown. It was the fear of losing him, the man she believed would stand beside her until the end. Charles, she whispered into the empty air, but her voice faded like smoke swallowed by the stillness. In the days after that night, Clarence's house became suffocating. Every corridor felt like an invisible battlefield. The staff moved with guarded steps, avoiding her eyes. There were spurs carrying through the walls. She could feel it. He had spoken to them. And now the air carried his disappointment like a ghost haunting her. But Camilla was not a woman to collapse under the weight of silence. She had clawed her way through decades of hatred, ridicule, and whispers that painted her as a villain. She had survived what many would not have endured. And so when faced with the looming loss of her title, her influence, and the love she had fought so hard to claim, she did not weep. She planned. Alone in all private chambers, she sat at her desk, her pale hands rested on her phone, her face lit by the glow of its screen. Her eyes no longer held sorrow. They gleamed with cold resolve. If he thinks I will fade quietly, she murmured to herself, he does not know me at all. Her fingers moved swiftly, numbers dialed, names whispered, plans ignited with the precision of a chess master. She began moving her pieces across the board, cursed the journalists, those who thrived on scandal, those who craved the next great story. She reached them in subtle ways, her voice soft, her tone careful. I only want the truth to be known, she told them, and soon the headlines of Be It, the forgotten Queen Camilla, the woman who sacrificed everything. They painted her as a loyal wife burdened with the monarchy's weight while her husband was consumed by fragile health and memories of the past. She was no longer the villain in their words, she was the victim, and the world began to listen. But that was only her first move. She called upon Annabelle, her childhood friend, who had stood beside her since the days when whispers of scandal could have ruined them both, and Tom, the financial advisor, who had quietly aided her dealings, smoothing paths others would have left rough. They met in secret far from Buckingham Palace's watchful gaze in discreet hotel on the outside rates of London. I only wanted to modernize the monarchy, Camilla told them, her voice steady, her tone convincing. Charles clings to the past. If we don't adapt, everything will fall apart. Annabelle nodded firmly. Tom hesitated, but eventually agreed, promising to gather support from sympathetic politicians. Camilla felt the ground bend.